Hi, David. Welcome back to the People Quotient Podcast. Good to have you back.
Nice to see you again, Rohit.
David, for those just dialing in, this is our third episode in the series on leadership and leadership development. And as appropriate as that name is, this episode is on leadership. And so we previously covered in our first episode peak performing teams or high performing teams. And then I think the second episode we covered peak performing individuals. And we talked a lot about how leaders, especially exceptional leaders, identify peak performing individuals, motivate them, and actually that results in high performing teams. And so a lot of what we referred to in our first few episodes, we'll touch on now as to how it gets done by a leader. But, leader is a very overused term. I feel like everybody talks about being a leader, leadership, being some this sort of, a thing that people strive to be. When you think about leader or leadership, where does one start? So if I'm a CEO listening in, why should I listen to another episode on leadership is my first question. And maybe you can expand on as how you've led people through that journey and why what we're about to talk about separates this conversation from hundreds of other conversations out there on leadership and being a leader.
Yeah. So as I think about it, there is a huge difference between being a leader and demonstrating leadership. Being a leader is a title that one carries. It's a role that you occupy. You may be promoted into it. You may be elected into it. You may be suddenly find yourself in it one day because of organizational circumstances. But it's a title that one carries. Leadership is a set of behaviors that one displays. And in that sense, therefore, leadership can emerge anywhere, regardless of the title that you carry. But for those that actually occupy the role of a leader, however we may define that, is it a CEO? Is it a manager? Is it a coach at a football club? Is it a prime minister? Then the question becomes, I am a leader because of the role that I'm performing, because of the title that I carry, but to what extent am I demonstrating leadership? And is it the kind of leadership that I aspire others to experience me demonstrating? And I think for me, that helps to define the difference between these two concepts.
Yeah, and one thing I'd point out to those listening is like, you these are not hypotheticals for you. You have worked with a prime minister, you've worked with, soccer coaches around the world at international level. You've worked with professional athletes and executive CEOs of Fortune 50. So when you say that, you're not saying it as a throwaway comment. Maybe that's the difference between some of the other content that's out there versus what we're about to talk about is you're coming at it, having looked at it through both private sector, public sector, corporate, as well as sports. And so, that blend and that experience is what we want to bring to the listeners in this series. And so one thing that you brought up is this point about aspirational leader. And we hear a lot about inspirational leaders. So can you talk a little bit about like how you think about, if I'm somebody who's aspiring to be a leader, wants to be a leader, should I try to be an aspirational leader or an inspirational leader, or do I have to be both? Like, again, how do I work my way through the maze of this leadership jargon that's out there?
Yeah. So the quick and easy answer is be both.
Yeah.
But there is a reason. There's a reason that I say that. You started off this conversation a few minutes ago, Rohit, by saying we talk about leader or leadership a lot. And you're right. And what we don't talk about, which is what I talk about with the leaders that I work with, is the notion of followership.
Yeah.
For me, it's a much more powerful route into thinking about what kind of leader do I want to be and what leadership behaviors do I want to stand for, do I want to demonstrate. It's hard to lead if nobody is following, right? Yes. And therefore, the notion of followership is really important. And it speaks to where we've evolved to with this notion of inspirational versus aspirational leadership. Inspirational leadership for me is how I lead others. Aspirational leadership is the flip side of that same coin, and it describes how others experience me leading myself. And therefore, followership is created on both sides of this coin. Followership for some comes from how you lead me, and followership for others comes from how I observe you leading yourself. And it's that package. It's the package of both aspirational and inspirational leadership for me as a leader to think about how am I creating followership? And I create it on both sides of that coin.
Is that on the piece around aspirational leadership? Some people growing up, everybody says lead by example. Is that where that it ties into, like leading by example? Does that tie into the aspirational side of leadership?
It does, but that's one strand. It's so fundamental. Let me give you an example. It is quite possible, and I've experienced some leaders who we won't mention, who fall into the category I'm about to describe. It is quite possible to be an inspirational leader that nobody wants to be like, because one sees that leader leading themselves in a way that when you look at them, you say, it can't be like that. I don't want to be like that. I don't want to make those sacrifices. I don't want to be treating people in that way. I don't want to make those trade-offs. And yet, the way that person leads me, they create opportunities for me. They coach me. They open doors for me. They're stretching my belief in myself to help me move to a new level. I love all that side of it. But when I see what I perceive to be the personal price they're paying for their leadership capability, I don't want to be like that. And for me, that is a waste. That is a waste of some great inspirational qualities that clearly exist in that person, in that leader. But because he or she is not thinking about how they're leading themselves and what kind of imagery that projects on their followers, it keeps their ability to create followership. And at its worst, it starts to reduce followership, particularly among those who are looking for balance, who are looking for long-term sustainability in their own leadership practice.
Yeah, I have just a lot of bing bings going in my head right now because, I'm thinking about and sort of reflecting on my own self and those that I know. You're absolutely right. Being an inspirational leader is not everything. It's when I'm thinking about specific people who've inspired me throughout my career, like and who've actually created opportunities for me, but the cost in which they've led it. And I've walked away from jobs. I've walked away from roles where there was an opportunity to step into something bigger for that lack of aspirational side. Because I think, and again, it's not about money, it's not about titles. It was about like, okay, if in order to live that way, if that is the model, I choose not to. And as a result, and I wasn't the only one. There are a lot of other people also walked away. And so it is very interesting. So what you're saying for those listening, it's almost a question to those leaders listening is that, are you an aspirational leader? It's almost like that is a bigger thing to shoot for. And then, because if you're not that, yes, you can be an inspirational leader. If you're not that, then obviously you've got to work on both. But being an aspirational leader is sort of the ultimate place to be, because not only that allows you to live a better, fulfilling personal life, but that takes your leadership, to your point about followership, your leadership to the next level, because more people would want to follow you.
Yes, right? Absolutely. And the interesting point about the personal example that you give there, Rohit, is that leader, that person that you were recalling, probably never gets to know the reason you or others didn't stick around was because of the reasons that you've just described. And that's the danger, right? That's the danger for a leader. And actually, the more senior you become as a leader, the lonelier it tends to become. And therefore, your ability as a leader to look inwards, have a balcony moment from time to time for yourself, right?
Yep.
On the dimensions of inspirational and aspirational leadership is absolutely crucial, because you don't get that information, you don't get that data from others in exactly the way that you've just described. And unless that person, unless that leader is working with a coach, for example, who may be able to share their own observations with that leader or conduct a number of independent 360s in order to generate some of that information, some of that data, then the risk for leaders is you don't know. You don't have the information that helps you recognize this in and of yourself.
No, I completely agree. And I think I agree with the point around being lonely at the top. You know, I've been there, I've feel that a lot. And often it is a really hard job, right? Being a leader, whether, again, titles aside, if you are leading a team, you're leading a company, you're leading a country, you know, it is a start, like, where do you turn to? Like, because, you know, the other side of the coin is vulnerability. Like, you know, how can you be vulnerable? Because inherently people still view that as a weakness. But I think it actually speaks to, from what you're describing, the aspirational side, because if you as a leader are able to demonstrate that that's how you are, your openness to learn, develop, you know, be introspective, take feedback, coaching, mentorship, it will inspire and give other people more to work with. Saying, well, hang on, that's the really good balanced way, because it's not one and done. And I think that's whether it's a mentorship model or whether it's, as you say, 360, all of those tools allow you to get data in. Is there anybody that you worked with that really stands out who had, in your opinion, has struck that balance in a nice way during the course of their career?
Yes, absolutely. I would say if we were looking at the world of sport, say, to start with, I think one of the most impressive people I've ever worked with, frankly, not just in the world of sport, but ever worked with, full stop, Xabi Alonso, former Spanish midfielder, now super successful manager at Bayer Leverkusen in the Bundesliga in Germany. And Xabi he always had a clear sense of purpose. So what do I mean by that? Part of what I mean by that is, I think sometimes in life, whatever walk of life we're in, we can start to identify ourselves by what we do rather than by who we are. And if what you do has a finite lifespan, which for most of us, I would argue for all of us, it does. For a footballer, it certainly does. And it usually comes at some point in your 30s. Then you're in trouble, right, for the rest of your life, because what you do ends. And if your identity is what you do and what you do ends, then... Yeah. And Xabi was always one of those that saw himself as more than what he did. There was always, from a career standpoint, there was always a longer term plan. He was a several horizon, still is, a several horizon thinker. But beyond that, there was always a sense of, because I am more than what I do, what else is important to me in life? And how am I making sure that I give time and attention to those things?
Yep.
So anyone listening in or watching us may have heard of his name, may be aware even of some of his achievements, but will know very little about him. Won't have read much about him on various media outlets, because he was more than what he did. And he was off spending time nurturing those things that were important to him in life. And what this did was, those around him, those teammates around him, fans of his, those leaders to whom he was answerable, the coach when he was a player, the board of the club, the owner of the club, the leaders in his sponsoring organizations, and so on. He was leading them. He was leading them as a 20-something, as a 30-something, because someone who has this greater sense of purpose, there is something quite magnetic about someone that operates in that space, who is more than what they do, who has this greater sense of purpose about their life, who has a very clear picture of what's important to them and why, and what's not important to them, and is actively taking control of choices in their life based on that sense of purpose that they have. And certainly from all the people that I've worked with and observed, he would be one of the standouts.
Yeah.
Both in purity terms, because that's who he was and who he is, but also maybe because it was a surprise. You know, maybe because we don't expect that of a sport person or a footballer in particular. But there he was. A huge difference between being a leader and demonstrating leadership. It's not so much about what I do, it's much more about how I do it. But we're pretty appalling at checking in on the how.
Subscribe to the People Quotient channel, where leadership meets action. Powerful conversations with practical insights that you can use right now. See you in the next episode.